Good morning, everyone. Quarter past the hour. Thousands of Christians living in Mosul, Iraq, forced to flee after the threat from the ISIS group, the terror group, saying this: convert, pay a protection tax, or be killed.
Now, churches are being turned into mosques, and holy sites like Jonah's tomb are being blown to bits. Joining us now with exclusive new details on the situation unfolding on the ground there is Hugh Iwaniki. He's a former emissary to Iraq and author of Shock and Alarm. Good morning, Hugh.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
And you've got some dramatic new information this morning. You're really talking about a genocide. Tell us what's going on in Iraq and how are Christians being affected?
Well, that's right. It is, in fact, a genocide that's going on. And what's happening in Iraq shouldn't be a surprise to us. The events that have taken place are entirely predictable, as I wrote about in my book, Shock and Alarm. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And Hugh, your sources are saying that there were 60,000 Christians in Mosul back in 2003. Then this past June, there were just 35,000. Today, currently zero. I mean, these numbers, astonishing. What can you attribute this to?
This is shocking, and in fact, some of my sources have provided me that, for example, there's the Presbyterian Church in Mosul that was founded in 1850, has now closed its doors, it's deserted with the last 4 members fleeing the country.
Well, tell us also, you also detail how an American Christian now is being held for $5 million ransom by ISIS, the dastardly terrorist group there. Tell us about that.
Well, I can't really go into a lot of details about that, but that is correct. Several months ago, an American Christian woman was kidnapped by ISIS, and she's being held for $5 million with her life in the balance here.
Well, what do you think the President of the United States needs to do in this situation? I mean, for Christians, Christians make up a large portion of the population here at home, and we're supposed to love our brothers and sisters in Christ. What does President Obama need to do?
Well, this is a very good question. When there was one Palestinian teenager that was killed in Israel, Obama spoke out publicly on this issue, and yet the president has refused to speak out publicly on what's happening in Iraq. Thousands of Christians are being killed or forced to flee from their homes. We as Americans, I believe, need to take decisive action, and not just the president, but also our country. Americans need to contact their elected representatives and to put pressure on our government to help these Iraqis find safety. Another thing that we can do, as far as I wrote about my book, is that there's donations that Americans can help as far as to help these Christians. For example, it's Open Doors and Voice of the Martyrs.
Well, that's very, very interesting. And a lot of Americans feel powerless and helpless in hearing about this and are wondering why the American government has not stepped up, but they can step up in their small ways. Hugh Iwaniki, Shock and Alarm, new book. Thanks for being with us here today. Keep us up to date as what is happening with this new genocide, as you say. Please do.
I will do that. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
And with me now, in defense of Christians, senior advisor and documentary filmmaker Jordan Alette. All right, good evening, Jordan. You've returned from Iraq, Syria, Turkey. You've seen firsthand the slaughter of Christians in the Middle East. What is going on there?
Well, thank you, Judge, for having me on and highlighting this very important issue. I think what's going on there is nothing short of a religious cleansing, sort of like the ethnic cleansing that took place in Bosnia years ago. And it's a very important time. We met with Christians, like you said, in Syria, Iraq, refugee camps in Lebanon, in Egypt, Coptic Christians there. And over again, like you said, they asked us the same question, and we didn't really have a very good answer for it. And that was, what is the West doing? What is the U.S. government doing? What are Americans doing to support the beleaguered Christian church in the Middle East? And again, like I said, we didn't have a very good answer for that question, because I think first and foremost, whether it's religious leaders, as you mentioned, or elected officials, they don't move unless people are aware and put pressure on them. And that's what our organization, In Defense of Christians, is trying to do. It's trying to educate people, trying to unify Christians, trying to make people aware, first and foremost, that there are Christians in the Middle East. Because let's be honest, I don't think most Americans even realize that there are large communities of Christians that have existed there for 2,000 years.
It's interesting that, 10% of the Coptic Christians, or of Egypt, is made up of Coptic Christians. But all indications are that ISIS is responsible for this. Now, we know that they are this radical Islamist group. Who are they, and how are they being funded?
Well, most likely they're being funded by Saudi Arabia and some of these radical groups there. But obviously their goal is, like I said, a religious cleansing, to get rid of all, not only Christians, but anything, like you mentioned, having to do with Christianity, whether it's the churches, the crosses, and they want to make it sort of one big Saudi Arabia. And that's not only a negative thing for the Christians there, but that's a very bad thing for the world in general.
And they're talking about doing it not just in the Middle East. Am I correct about that?
Well, I think it would be naive to assume that they would stop with just Iraq and Syria and some of these other countries. I'm sure there's a bigger plan there. And if we think that they would stop at that point, like I said, I think we'd be very naive.
All right, and you believe that the forces eradicating Christians in the Middle East are the same forces that took down the World Trade Center. Why do you say that? And I assume that you're saying that there is a national security interest in this issue for the United States.
Oh, absolutely, and I think there are definite ties there. Some of the same funding sources, like I said, that were involved with Al-Qaeda. And as we know, ISIS is actually in a more extreme group than Al-Qaeda. Right. And so, you have to be aware of that. We have to be knowledgeable about that fact. But like I said, we need to make sure that we stand for the Christians there, because when Christians are in these communities, there's a real difference. Like the Coptic Christians, who make up 10% of the population in Egypt, a lot of times they influence poor Muslims in general in the institutions, whether it's schools, whether it's hospitals, and they have a real effect, because Muslims who are brought up in a Christian school or have Christian neighbors and friends are a lot less likely to be radicalized than those that are brought up in a totally sort of extremist environment.
And Jordan, what we do know is that from what happened in Egypt, that a lot of the Muslims were taking Christians into their mosques to assist them, and Christians were helping Muslims. So it's as though, at a certain level, at a human-to-human level, people can live together as they have for centuries, but it's at the top where this hate and this, this vitriol and violence is coming down. But what happens if Christians are forced out of the Middle East?
Well, like I said, each generation is likely to be much more radicalized. And I just want to give you a quick story from, we were able to get into Syria through the border from Turkey, and we met with an evangelical pastor, and he and his congregation actually were helping the Muslims who had come from different parts of the country. And like I said, they're a lot less likely to be radicalized because of that personal connection, that personal relationship that they had established with Christians in the area.
Well, let's hope that, the world does get involved. And Jordan, I know you've done documentaries on this issue. We thank you very much for being with us tonight.
All right. Thank you for having me.